Stay with me for a moment. Before we begin, let's make something clear. This is not a motivational talk. This is not a speech designed to hype you up or push you to do more. This is a space. Most people today don't suffer because they lack ambition. They suffer because their minds never get a moment to land. Every day, your attention is pulled in dozens of directions. Messages, expectations, opinions, noise. Not loud noise, but constant noise. The kind that never gives your thoughts time to finish a sentence. And over time, something subtle happens. You start feeling tired without knowing why. You feel restless even when nothing is wrong. You try to think clearly, but your thoughts feel crowded, rushed, incomplete. If that sounds familiar, there's nothing wrong with you. Your mind isn't broken, it's overloaded. The human mind was never designed to process endless input without pause. It was designed for rhythm, for focus, then rest, for attention, then release. But modern life removed the release. So what you're feeling isn't weakness, it's a signal that your mind needs space again. That's why this hour matters. Not because you'll hear something revolutionary, not because I'll give you secrets no one else knows, but because for the next 60 minutes, you are not required to rush. You're not required to perform. You're not required to fix yourself. All I ask is that you stay. Stay long enough for your nervous system to slow down. Stay long enough for your thoughts to stop competing for attention. Stay long enough for your inner voice to come back online. You don't need to believe anything yet. You don't need to agree with everything you hear. Just listen. Most shifts in mindset don't happen through force. They happen through permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to stop chasing clarity and let clarity return on its own. Over the next hour, we'll talk about things your mind already knows, but hasn't had time to articulate. Why your thoughts feel heavier than they used to. Why silence feels uncomfortable at first. Why overthinking is not the same as deep thinking. Why calm is not weakness, but leverage. We'll explore how to regain emotional control without suppressing yourself. How to trust your own judgment again. How to let go of pressure you didn't consciously choose. Nothing here requires intensity. In fact, intensity is the opposite of what we're doing. Think of this as a recalibration, like letting muddy water sit long enough for the sediment to settle. You don't stir it to make it clear. You leave it alone. Clarity arrives when movement stops. As you listen, you may notice moments of resistance. Your mind might want to jump ahead, to analyze, to judge, to ask, where is this going? That's normal. When a mind is used to constant stimulation, stillness feels unfamiliar, almost unsafe. But stay anyway. You don't need to extract value from every sentence. You don't need to remember everything. If something resonates, let it land. If something doesn't, let it pass. This hour isn't about collecting ideas. It's about shifting how you relate to your own thoughts. By the end, the change won't feel dramatic. There won't be fireworks, no sudden personality transformation. The shift is quieter than that. You may feel more grounded, more centered, less pulled in 10 directions at once. You may notice a subtle sense of alignment, like your mind and body are finally moving at the same pace again, and that's enough. So settle in, adjust your posture if you need to. Let your breathing slow, just slightly. You don't have to do anything else. Just stay with me. The shift doesn't begin with effort. It begins with presence, and you're already here. Chapter 1. Why your mind feels so heavy. Lately, there is a weight in your mind that didn't used to be there. It's not sharp enough to call pain, not loud enough to call anxiety. Just a persistent pressure that sits quietly in the background of everything you do. You wake up and already feel behind. You go through the day checking tasks off, yet nothing feels complete. Even when you stop, your mind doesn't. And the most confusing part is this: you can't point to a single reason why. Nothing dramatic happened. Your life may look stable. You're still functioning, still responsible, still showing up. But inside, something feels heavier than it should. Most people interpret this heaviness as a personal failure. They assume they've lost discipline, lost motivation, lost their edge. That interpretation is wrong. Your mind doesn't feel heavy because you're weak. It feels heavy because it's overloaded. Modern life doesn't crush people through intensity. It crushes them through accumulation. From the moment you wake up, your mind is pulled outward. Notifications, information, decisions, unspoken expectations. Your brain enters the day already reacting. There is no clean start, no mental stillness before demand begins. And once your nervous system switches into that mode, it rarely shuts off. You move from one input to the next. One thought interrupts another. Even rest becomes another thing to manage. Your mind never finishes a full loop. Unfinished thoughts don't disappear. They stack. Every unresolved conversation, every delayed decision, every worry you plan to deal with later. Each one adds a small, invisible weight. You don't notice it at first, but over time, your mind becomes crowded. Not chaotic, crowded. Crowding is subtle. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply slows you down. This is why your thinking feels heavier than it used to. Not less capable, not less intelligent, just slower, denser, harder to move through. Your clarity hasn't vanished. It's buried. Another source of this heaviness is constant self-monitoring. You are always watching yourself, evaluating your progress, comparing where you are to where you think you should be. Even in moments that should be neutral, your mind stays alert. Am I doing enough? Am I wasting time? Am I falling behind? This internal commentary never rests. And when self-reflection has no off switch, it turns into self-surveillance. You're not just living your life, you're tracking it. That constant observation splits your energy. One part of you experiences the moment, another part judges it. That split is exhausting. It's also why silence feels uncomfortable. When external noise stops, your internal load becomes obvious. Thoughts you've postponed finally surface. Questions you've avoided begin asking themselves. So you reach for stimulation again. Your phone, background noise, anything to stay occupied. Not because you enjoy it, but because distraction feels lighter than stillness. This creates a loop. The more crowded your mind becomes, the harder stillness feels. The harder stillness feels, the more you avoid it. The more you avoid it, the heavier your mind grows. Eventually, heaviness starts to feel like your default state. But here is the truth most people never learn. Your mind is not asking for more control. It's asking for less load. It doesn't need to be pushed harder. It needs to be allowed to release. Mental heaviness is not a flaw. It's a signal that your mind has been holding too much for too long. A signal that your nervous system has stayed in readiness mode without recovery. You're not tired because life is difficult. You're tired because your mind never gets permission to stand down. And the moment you understand this, something important changes. You stop blaming yourself. You stop forcing clarity. You stop treating heaviness as something to fix aggressively. Instead, you recognize it for what it is. Load. And when something is recognized correctly, your posture toward it changes. You don't fight weight by tensing harder. You set it down gradually. This chapter isn't about solutions yet. It's about recognition. Because once you can name what you're carrying, it stops being mysterious. And when something stops being mysterious, it stops owning you. Your mind feels heavy lately, not because you're failing, not because you're incapable, not because something is wrong with you. It feels heavy because it has been asked to do too much for too long, without rest. And now that you can see that clearly, the weight doesn't disappear, but it loosens. And that loosening is where real change begins. Chapter 2. The noise you mistake for your own thoughts. One of the most exhausting things about the modern mind is this. You are rarely thinking your own thoughts. That may sound unsettling at first, but if you pay close attention, you'll recognize it immediately. Much of what runs through your mind each day didn't originate inside you. It entered quietly, through conversations, through screens, through expectations you absorbed without questioning. And over time, that borrowed noise began to feel like your inner voice. You wake up with opinions you didn't choose, concerns you didn't consciously create, urgencies that don't actually belong to you, yet they feel personal. That's because the mind doesn't label the source of a thought once it's inside. It simply reacts. Most people assume thinking happens internally, so whatever appears in the mind must be theirs. But the mind is more like a room with open windows than a sealed container. Ideas drift in, judgments echo, other people's fears settle in the corners. And if you never pause to notice where a thought came from, you mistake noise for insight. This is why your mind feels busy even when your life is relatively calm. You're not overwhelmed by your reality. You're overwhelmed by interpretations of reality that aren't even yours. Think about how often your thoughts take the form of comparison. I should be further along. Others are doing better. I'm falling behind. Those thoughts feel internal, but they are social in origin. They didn't arise from your values. They arose from exposure. Your mind learned to speak in borrowed language. Another form of noise is constant commentary. Not thinking in depth, but narrating everything, labeling, judging, predicting outcomes that haven't happened yet. This commentary feels productive, but it isn't. It's reactive. True thinking is slow. It has weight. It unfolds. Noise is fast. It jumps. It repeats. And because noise moves quickly, it often feels urgent. That urgency tricks you into believing it deserves attention. But urgency is not the same as importance. Most of the thoughts pulling at you don't need answers. They need distance. The reason silence feels uncomfortable is not because silence is empty. It's because silence reveals how loud the noise has become. When you stop external stimulation, your mind doesn't suddenly become chaotic. It simply shows you what was already there. Unprocessed input, unfinished emotional reactions, thoughts that never had space to resolve. So you label silence as dangerous or unproductive and rush back to distraction. But distraction doesn't remove noise. It stacks it. The more you distract yourself, the more fragmented your inner world becomes. And the more fragmented it becomes, the harder it is to tell which thoughts matter. This is where many people lose trust in themselves. When your mind is loud, it feels unreliable. When it's unreliable, you look outward for direction. Advice, opinions, validation, that reinforces the cycle. Other voices get louder, your own gets quieter. Eventually, you stop recognizing what clarity feels like. But clarity isn't something you create by force. It's something that appears when noise subsides. The problem isn't that you don't have an inner voice. It's that it's buried under layers of input. Your real thoughts don't shout, they don't rush, they don't pressure. They arrive slowly, often after stillness. They sound calm, measured, grounded, and because they lack drama, they're easy to overlook. Noise, on the other hand, thrives on emotional charge. It pushes, it warns, it predicts disaster. Noise tells you everything is urgent. Your inner voice tells you what matters. Most people confuse the two because they've never been taught how to separate them. The distinction begins with awareness. When a thought arises, ask gently, is this something I decided or something I absorbed? You don't need to answer immediately. Just noticing creates space, and space is the beginning of control. This chapter isn't asking you to silence your mind completely. That's unrealistic. It's asking you to stop believing every thought deserves equal attention. Not every thought is guidance. Not every concern is a warning. Not every mental signal requires action. Some thoughts are just echoes. Echoes of conversations, echoes of culture, echoes of fear. When you learn to recognize them as echoes, they lose authority. Your mind doesn't become empty. It becomes selective, and selectivity is freedom. As we move forward, the goal isn't to eliminate noise overnight. It's to stop mistaking it for wisdom. Because once you stop identifying with the noise, something unexpected happens. Your inner voice doesn't need to fight to be heard. It simply returns, quietly, naturally, when you finally give it the space it's been waiting for. Chapter 3. Slowing down is not falling behind. Most people live with a quiet fear they rarely admit. The fear that if they slow down, everything will collapse. Opportunities will disappear. Others will pass them by. Momentum will be lost. So they keep moving, not always forward, just constantly. Speed becomes a habit, not a strategy. And over time, this habit convinces you that slowing down equals failure. But that belief didn't come from wisdom. It came from conditioning. Modern culture equates motion with progress, busyness with importance, urgency with value. If you are always rushing, you must be needed. If you are always responding, you must matter. But constant motion is not the same as direction. In fact, speed without direction is one of the fastest ways to feel lost. When you move too quickly, you stop sensing what's actually happening. You react instead of choose. You respond instead of decide. Slowing down doesn't remove your edge. It restores it. Think about the moments when you've made your best decisions. They rarely happened in panic. They happened in clarity. Clarity requires space. Yet many people avoid slowing down because stillness feels like exposure. When you stop rushing, you start noticing things you've been outrunning: doubt, fatigue, questions without immediate answers. So you speed up again. This creates a paradox. The faster you move, the less control you feel. The less control you feel, the faster you move. Eventually, exhaustion becomes the baseline. And because everyone around you is exhausted too, it feels normal. But normal doesn't mean healthy. The mind needs pauses the way the body needs oxygen. Without them, performance doesn't improve. It degrades. Slowing down is not about doing less forever. It's about doing less long enough to regain precision. A calm mind sees patterns a rushed mind misses. It notices subtle signals. It anticipates rather than reacts. This is why truly effective people appear unhurried. They are not behind. They are ahead of unnecessary motion. They understand something most people don't. Urgency is often manufactured, not by reality, but by perception. Many of the things that feel time-sensitive aren't. They just feel that way because you're carrying too many demands at once. When everything feels urgent, nothing is prioritized. Slowing down allows priority to re-emerge, and priority creates leverage. Another reason slowing down feels threatening is identity. If you've built your sense of worth on productivity, rest feels like betrayal. If you've learned that value comes from output, pausing feels irresponsible. So you stay busy to feel secure. But busyness is a fragile foundation for identity. The moment you stop, the anxiety rushes in. This isn't a sign you need to move faster. It's a sign you need a different relationship with time. Time is not an enemy to outrun. It's a medium to move through deliberately. When you slow your pace, you don't lose time. You stop wasting it. You notice where your energy actually goes, what drains you unnecessarily, what deserves attention and what doesn't. This awareness is impossible at high speed. Speed blurs cause and effect. That's why slowing down initially feels uncomfortable. Your system is recalibrating. Just like a body adjusting after constant caffeine, your mind needs time to settle. During that settling, discomfort arises. Restlessness, impatience, the urge to do something. These are not signals to speed up again. They are signs the habit of urgency is loosening its grip. Slowing down is not passive. It's intentional. It's choosing depth over volume, precision over reaction, direction over motion. When you slow down, your decisions become cleaner. Your words become measured. Your presence becomes noticeable. People trust calm, not because it's impressive, but because it feels grounded. A rushed person feels unpredictable. A calm person feels stable. This stability is power. It allows you to act rather than scramble, to wait when others panic, to move decisively when the moment actually matters. Slowing down doesn't make you irrelevant, it makes you effective. You don't need to withdraw from life to slow down. You need to stop equating speed with success. This chapter isn't asking you to abandon ambition. It's asking you to refine it, to recognize that real progress is not measured by how fast you move, but by how clearly you see where you're going. Falling behind is moving quickly in the wrong direction. Slowing down is how you make sure that doesn't happen. And once you experience that clarity, you realize something important. You were never behind. You were just moving too fast to notice where you already were. Chapter 4. The difference between thinking and overthinking. Most people believe they think too much, but that isn't quite true. What they actually do is repeat the same thoughts over and over without resolution. That repetition is not thinking, it's looping. Thinking moves forward, overthinking circles. And the reason your mind feels exhausted is not because it's working deeply, but because it's running in place. Real thinking has a direction. It explores, evaluates, and then arrives somewhere. Even if the conclusion is uncertain, there is movement. Overthinking never arrives. It replays, it revisits, it reopens questions that have already been asked. This distinction matters because overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility. You tell yourself you're being careful, thorough, prepared. But beneath that story, something else is happening. Overthinking is usually driven by fear. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of missing something important. Fear of being judged later for not considering every angle. So the mind stays busy as a form of self-protection. If you're always thinking, you can't be blamed for not caring. But constant analysis doesn't create safety. It creates paralysis. The more you analyze, the more possibilities you uncover. The more possibilities you see, the harder it becomes to choose. Eventually, decision-making feels heavy. Not because decisions are complex, but because your mind is saturated. This is why overthinking often appears alongside indecision. Your mind isn't stuck because it lacks information. It's stuck because it refuses to close a loop. Closing a loop feels final. Finality feels risky. So you delay. You keep the question open just in case more certainty appears. But certainty doesn't arrive through endless thought. It arrives through commitment. Thinking helps you understand options. Action clarifies them. Overthinking avoids action because action exposes you to consequence. Another subtle difference between thinking and overthinking is tone. Thinking feels neutral, curious, even calm. Overthinking feels urgent, pressured, emotionally charged. When your thoughts carry anxiety, they are rarely guiding you. They are signaling unresolved emotion. Overthinking is often the mind trying to process feelings it doesn't know how to hold. So it turns emotion into analysis. This is why some people can explain their problems in great detail but still feel stuck. The explanation isn't the issue. The emotion underneath hasn't been addressed. The mind keeps circling the thought because it's actually circling the feeling. Another sign you're overthinking is loss of perspective. Small decisions feel enormous. Minor mistakes feel catastrophic. Future outcomes feel fixed and negative. Thinking expands perspective. Overthinking narrows it. The more you loop, the smaller your mental world becomes. Everything reduces to, what if this goes wrong? That question isn't a strategy. It's a stress response. And stress shuts down creative problem solving. This is why overthinking rarely produces insight. It produces tension. Insight comes when the nervous system feels safe enough to explore. That safety doesn't come from more thought. It comes from space. Space between you and the problem. Space between you and the outcome. This is also why slowing down helps break overthinking loops. When you reduce mental speed, you reduce emotional intensity. When emotional intensity drops, clarity can emerge. Overthinking thrives in urgency. Thinking thrives in stillness. The goal isn't to stop thinking altogether. That would be neither possible nor useful. The goal is to notice when thinking turns into looping. When you catch yourself replaying the same concerns without new information, that's your cue. Not to push harder, not to analyze better, but to pause. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is stop thinking about the problem and let your nervous system settle. Clarity often arrives after the pause, not during the analysis. Another important shift is learning to trust incomplete answers. Overthinking demands certainty before movement. Thinking accepts enough clarity to proceed. You don't need perfect understanding to take the next step. You need sufficient understanding. The rest reveals itself through experience. This chapter isn't about criticizing your mind. Overthinking developed for a reason. At some point, it protected you. It helped you anticipate danger or avoid mistakes. But what once protected you may now be limiting you. The mind that never stops scanning for problems never gets to experience ease. And ease is not laziness, it's efficiency. When you stop confusing overthinking with intelligence, you stop rewarding mental exhaustion. You begin to value clarity over control. And in that shift, something changes. Your mind doesn't become empty. It becomes purposeful. Thoughts move with intention. Decisions feel lighter. And the mental weight you've been carrying starts to ease. Not because you thought your way out of it, but because you finally learned when to stop. Chapter 5. Releasing the need to fix yourself. At some point, many people quietly decide there is something wrong with them, not broken enough to stop functioning, not dramatic enough to name, just a subtle sense of deficiency that follows them through life. So they begin trying to fix themselves. They consume advice. They optimize routines. They analyze habits, emotions, reactions, thoughts. Self-improvement becomes a permanent project. On the surface, this looks healthy, responsible, ambitious. But beneath it, there is often an unspoken belief. I'm not acceptable as I am, and that belief changes everything. When growth is driven by curiosity, it expands you. When it's driven by self-rejection, it exhausts you. Most people don't realize when they cross that line. They think they are becoming better, but they are actually at war with themselves. Every flaw becomes evidence. Every setback confirms the suspicion. Every uncomfortable emotion is treated like a defect. Fixing becomes compulsive, and the mind never rests when it believes it is unacceptable in the present. This is why self-improvement can quietly increase anxiety instead of relieving it. You're always one insight away from being okay, one habit away from peace, one breakthrough away from self-respect. But that finish line keeps moving, because the problem was never lack of effort. It was the assumption that you needed fixing in the first place. Growth does not begin with rejection. It begins with understanding. There is a difference between improving and attacking. Improving says, this can evolve. Attacking says, this shouldn't exist. Your nervous system responds very differently to each. When you attack yourself internally, Your system stays in defense mode, alert, tense, braced. And a braced system does not change easily. It resists. It tightens. This is why forcing change often backfires. You might make progress temporarily, but the underlying pressure remains. Sooner or later, exhaustion follows. Releasing the need to fix yourself does not mean abandoning growth. It means changing the posture from which growth happens. Instead of standing over yourself with judgment, you stand beside yourself with awareness. That shift alone is transformative. Consider this: most behaviors you want to fix were once adaptations. Overthinking kept you safe. People-pleasing preserved connection. Control reduced uncertainty. These patterns didn't appear randomly. They formed in response to real conditions. When you treat them as flaws, you miss their original function. When you understand them, they soften naturally. You don't need to punish adaptations. You need to update them. And updates happen through safety, not pressure. Another reason the fixing mindset is so heavy is that it keeps you permanently future-oriented. You are always becoming, never arriving. Peace is postponed. Acceptance is conditional. I'll relax when I'm better. I'll be confident when I improve. I'll be calm when I fix this. But calm does not arrive after perfection. Perfection is a moving target. Calm arrives when you stop fighting your present state. This doesn't mean indulging harmful patterns. It means acknowledging what is real now. Real change happens from the inside out, and the inside cannot change while it's under constant attack. Think about how learning actually works. You don't learn effectively when you're shamed. You learn when you feel safe enough to explore. Your mind is no different. When you stop treating yourself like a problem to solve, your system relaxes. And in that relaxation, clarity appears. You begin to notice what truly matters instead of constantly scanning for what's wrong. This chapter is not asking you to give up effort. It's asking you to give up hostility. You can work on yourself without working against yourself. There is a quiet strength in saying, "This is where I am, and I'm willing to understand it." Understanding does not freeze you in place. It frees energy. Energy that was previously spent on self-criticism becomes available for growth. When the need to fix yourself loosens, something unexpected happens. You become more honest. Without the pressure to be better, you can see yourself clearly, and clarity is far more powerful than control. You don't grow by rejecting who you are today. You grow by building a relationship with it, a relationship based on awareness, not judgment, curiosity, not urgency, respect, not force. This chapter is an invitation to step out of the self-improvement battlefield and into a different space, a space where change is allowed to be gradual, where progress doesn't require self-contempt, where you are not a project to complete, but a system learning to rebalance. You were never broken. You adapted, you learned, you survived. Now, instead of fixing yourself, you can begin listening. And listening is where real transformation starts. Chapter 6: Emotional Control Without Suppression. Many people believe emotional control means becoming colder, less reactive, less expressive, less affected. They imagine a version of themselves who feels less, who stays untouched no matter what happens. But that image is misleading. Emotional control is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to experience emotion without being driven by it. Suppression looks like control from the outside, but internally, it creates pressure. When you push emotions down, they don't disappear. They wait. They surface later as tension in the body, irritability without a clear cause, or exhaustion that doesn't match your effort. True control works in the opposite direction. It creates space around emotion instead of forcing it away. Most emotional reactions happen faster than conscious thought. Your nervous system responds first. Your body reacts before your mind explains. This is not a flaw, it's biology. The problem begins when reaction is immediately followed by identification. You don't just feel anger, you become angry. You don't just feel fear, you are afraid. The emotion takes the steering wheel. Emotional control begins at the moment you notice this shift. There is a small gap between feeling and acting. Most people rush through it. They speak too quickly. They decide too fast. They react before understanding what they are responding to. Control is the ability to widen that gap. Not by force, but by awareness. When you can say, "I feel this," instead of "I am this," the emotion loses its grip. You haven't denied it. You've contextualized it. Another common mistake is believing emotions need to be resolved immediately. You feel discomfort, so you look for relief. You feel frustration, so you seek release. But immediate discharge often strengthens the pattern. The nervous system learns. React fast to feel better. That's not control, that's conditioning. Sometimes emotional mastery means staying with the sensation without turning it into action, letting the wave pass. Emotions have a natural arc. They rise, peak, and fall. When you don't interfere, most emotions dissolve on their own. Suppression interrupts this arc. So does impulsive expression. Control is neither. It's observation without interference. This is why calm people appear unshakable. Not because they feel less, but because they don't rush to translate feeling into behavior. They allow emotion to inform, not command. Another layer of emotional control is understanding what emotions signal. Anger often points to a boundary. Fear points to uncertainty. Sadness points to attachment. These signals are useful. When you suppress them, you lose information. When you explode them outward, you lose direction. Control means listening without obeying blindly. It's the difference between reading a dashboard and letting the dashboard drive the car. One of the most powerful skills you can develop is the ability to pause when emotionally activated. That pause does not require dramatic techniques. Often it's as simple as breathing more slowly than the emotion demands. Emotion accelerates, breath slows. When breath slows, the nervous system recalibrates. This isn't mystical, it's physiological. You're telling your system there is no immediate threat. Once the body settles, the mind regains access to perspective. Perspective is impossible in peak emotional states. This is why decisions made in emotional intensity often don't align with long-term values. Control allows alignment to return. Another misconception is that emotional control means never expressing emotions. In reality, unexpressed emotion builds pressure. The key is timing and form. Expression is most effective after emotion has passed its peak, when clarity returns. This is when communication is clean, boundaries are clear, and regret is minimal. Control chooses when and how emotion is expressed, not if. This chapter is not about becoming emotionally distant. It's about becoming emotionally precise. Precision reduces collateral damage. You stop saying things you don't mean. You stop reacting in ways that undermine your own goals. You gain credibility, both with others and with yourself. When you respond instead of react, you begin to trust your own behavior. And self-trust is foundational to calm. Emotional control is not rigid discipline, it's flexibility. It's the ability to feel deeply and still choose wisely. That combination is rare because it requires patience. Patience with sensation, patience with discomfort, patience with the moment before action. But once you experience this kind of control, you realize something important. You don't need to harden yourself to be strong. You need to stay present long enough to choose. And in that choice, real power begins to take shape. Chapter 7. Trusting yourself again. At some point, many people stop trusting themselves, quietly and without ceremony. There is no single moment where it happens, no clear decision to hand the trust away. It erodes gradually through small experiences that stack over time. A decision that didn't work out, advice you followed that led nowhere, an instinct you ignored because someone else sounded more confident. Each time a small message is learned, my judgment isn't reliable. Eventually, you stop checking in with yourself at all. You ask others what to do. You look for validation before committing. You hesitate even when something feels right. This hesitation isn't caution. It's a loss of internal authority. When you don't trust yourself, every choice feels heavy because it carries the weight of potential regret. So you delay. You gather more opinions. You keep the decision open, hoping clarity will arrive from the outside. But clarity doesn't arrive that way. Self-trust is not built through certainty. It's built through relationship. And like any relationship, it weakens when ignored. Many people believe self-trust comes from being right most of the time. That belief keeps them stuck, because no one is right most of the time. Trust doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. It's the experience of making a decision, standing behind it, and learning from the outcome. Even when the outcome isn't ideal, what breaks self-trust is not mistakes. It's abandonment. Abandoning your values to please others. Abandoning your instincts out of fear. Abandoning your own perspective to avoid discomfort. Each abandonment sends a message inward: I won't protect you. Over time, your inner voice stops speaking clearly, not because it disappeared, but because it learned it wouldn't be listened to. Rebuilding self-trust begins with small promises, not dramatic life changes, not bold declarations, simple commitments you can keep. Saying no when you mean no, following through on something you said you would do, stopping when you know you're tired instead of pushing out of guilt. These moments may seem insignificant, but they are not. They tell your nervous system, I'm paying attention again. Trust grows through repetition. Each time you act in alignment with what you know is right, even when it's inconvenient, the relationship repairs itself. Another barrier to self-trust is fear of being wrong. Many people believe trusting themselves means refusing outside input. That's not true. Self-trust does not reject information. It filters it. You can listen to advice without surrendering authority. The difference is subtle but critical. When you trust yourself, you consult others without disappearing in their opinions. You take what resonates, you leave what doesn't, and you decide. Decision is the final step where trust is expressed. Without decision, trust remains theoretical. It's also important to understand that self-trust is situational. You may trust yourself deeply in some areas and doubt yourself in others. That's normal. The goal is not blind confidence, it's honest assessment. You don't need to believe you're always right. You need to believe you'll handle the outcome. That belief changes everything. When you trust yourself to respond adaptively, decisions lose their emotional charge. Mistakes become data, not indictments. Another way self-trust erodes is through constant self-criticism. When your internal dialogue is harsh, your system stays defensive, and a defensive system cannot trust. Trust requires safety. If every misstep is punished internally, your mind learns to hesitate. Rebuilding trust means changing how you talk to yourself after mistakes. Not excusing them, not dramatizing them, just acknowledging and adjusting. This is how competence actually develops. Not through fear of error, but through permission to learn. Self-trust also grows when you stop outsourcing certainty. There will always be uncertainty. No amount of research eliminates it completely. Waiting for total clarity is a form of avoidance. At some point, you choose. And that choice, backed by willingness to learn, is an act of trust. This chapter is not about becoming fearless. Fear will still appear. It's about acting without letting fear decide for you. Trusting yourself again doesn't mean you'll never doubt. It means doubt no longer paralyzes you. You move forward with awareness, not assurance. And over time, something shifts. Decisions feel lighter. Your inner voice grows clearer. You stop looking outward for permission. Not because you know everything, but because you trust your ability to respond. And that trust becomes a quiet foundation, stable, unimpressive, unshakable. From there, calm stops being something you chase. It becomes the natural result of standing behind yourself again. Chapter 8. Letting go of mental pressure. Much of the pressure you feel is not created by what you are doing. It is created by what you believe you should be doing. This distinction is easy to miss because pressure feels external. Deadlines, responsibilities, expectations. But if you look closely, you'll notice something important. Two people can live under similar circumstances, yet experience completely different levels of mental strain. The difference is not workload, it's internal demand. Mental pressure forms when expectation replaces presence. You are rarely just doing a task. You are measuring yourself against an invisible standard while doing it. Am I fast enough? Am I far enough along? Am I behind where I should be by now? These questions run quietly in the background, adding weight to everything you touch. Over time, that weight becomes constant. Most of these expectations were never chosen consciously. They were absorbed from culture, from family, from comparison. You learned a pace that wasn't yours and started living inside it. When your natural rhythm doesn't match the borrowed one, pressure appears. Not because you're failing, but because you're misaligned. This is why rest often doesn't feel restful. You stop moving physically, but mentally you're still being evaluated. Rest becomes another task to perform correctly, and because it's measured, it fails. Letting go of mental pressure begins with noticing where it comes from. Pressure is rarely about what's happening now. It's about an imagined future judgment. What will this lead to? How will this look? What if this isn't enough? The mind pulls you forward constantly, away from the only place where action actually happens. The present. When you live ahead of yourself, everything feels urgent, even things that aren't. This creates a background tension that never resolves, because the future never arrives. There is always another checkpoint, another comparison, another imagined standard to meet. Mental pressure thrives on conditional peace. I'll relax when this is done. I'll feel better when I reach that point. I'll allow myself ease after I prove something. But peace that depends on future conditions is peace that never arrives. Letting go of pressure does not mean abandoning goals. It means removing self-worth from the outcome. Goals give direction. Pressure steals capacity. When pressure is high, performance actually drops. Not because you care less, but because your system is overloaded. Your nervous system doesn't interpret pressure as motivation. It interprets it as threat. And under threat, the mind narrows. Creativity declines. Perspective shrinks. Everything feels heavier than it needs to be. Releasing pressure is not about lowering standards. It's about separating effort from self-judgment. You can work hard without condemning yourself. You can aim high without punishing yourself for being human. Another hidden source of pressure is the need to justify your pace. You feel the urge to explain why you're not further ahead, why you need rest, why you chose a slower path. This urge comes from the assumption that your rhythm requires approval. It doesn't. Your pace is not a moral statement. It's a biological and psychological reality. When you stop defending it, pressure loses one of its main supports. Letting go also means accepting that some discomfort is unavoidable. Not all pressure is unnecessary, but much of it is amplified. There is a difference between effort and strain. Effort feels engaged. Strain feels constricted. Effort moves with breath. Strain holds it. When you learn to notice this difference, you can adjust before exhaustion sets in. Sometimes letting go is as simple as allowing a task to be imperfect, allowing a day to be incomplete, allowing progress to be uneven. Pressure demands constant optimization. Reality doesn't. Reality unfolds in waves. Some days carry momentum, others carry integration. Both are necessary. When you stop treating low-energy days as failures, you recover faster. Pressure also weakens when you stop comparing invisible internals to visible externals. You see someone else's output. You don't see their doubt, fatigue, or context. Comparing those two is unfair by design. Yet the mind does it automatically. Releasing pressure means opting out of that comparison loop as often as possible. Not through denial, but through redirection. You bring attention back to what is actually in front of you. One action, one choice, one moment. This doesn't make life smaller. It makes it manageable. This chapter isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about becoming unburdened. Pressure convinces you that everything is on the line. Letting go reminds you that most things are not. And when the mind stops carrying imagined weight, it regains flexibility. You respond instead of brace. You move instead of tense. The world doesn't suddenly become easier, but you become less compressed inside it. That is the real release. Not escaping responsibility, but meeting it without the unnecessary weight of constant self-pressure. And once that weight loosens, you discover something quietly powerful. You don't need to push yourself as hard as you thought to move forward. You just needed to stop pushing against yourself. Chapter 9. Becoming calm in a loud world. The world you live in is not designed for calm. It is designed for stimulation, for speed, for reaction. Every system around you competes for attention. Every message pushes urgency. Every platform rewards noise. In this environment, calm can feel unnatural, almost irresponsible. If you're not reacting, you might be missing something. If you're not responding quickly, you might fall behind. So most people stay mentally alert at all times. They call it being informed, being connected, being prepared. But what it actually creates is chronic tension. A nervous system that never fully stands down cannot return to balance. Calm, in this context, becomes a skill rather than a personality trait. It's not something you are born with. It's something you practice against resistance. Becoming calm does not mean escaping the world. It means changing how the world enters you. Noise does not exhaust you by existing. It exhausts you by being processed without filter. When everything feels equally important, your system treats everything as a potential threat. This is why even small things can trigger disproportionate reactions. Your capacity has already been consumed. Calm begins when you reduce unnecessary intake, not by cutting everything out, but by choosing consciously. You don't need to respond to every message immediately. You don't need to form opinions on everything you encounter. You don't need to react just because something is loud. Calm people are not disengaged. They are selective. They understand that attention is finite. Every time you give attention to something, you take it away from something else, usually from yourself. Another reason calm feels rare is that it's often misunderstood as passivity. But calm is active restraint. It's the decision not to amplify what doesn't deserve energy. This restraint creates a presence that others notice. In conversations, calm people listen fully instead of preparing responses. In conflict, they slow the tempo instead of matching intensity. This doesn't make them weak. It makes them influential. Because calm changes the emotional climate. When one person slows down, others unconsciously follow. This is why calm leadership feels safe, not because it promises certainty, but because it reduces chaos. Another aspect of calm is emotional containment. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means holding it without leaking it everywhere. In a loud world, emotional leakage is constant. People broadcast frustration. Anxiety spreads quickly. Outrage becomes contagious. When you don't contain your own emotions, you absorb others without noticing. Calm creates a boundary. It allows you to feel without becoming a conduit for noise. This boundary is not rigid. It's porous but intentional. You let in what matters. You let pass what doesn't. Becoming calm also requires redefining urgency. Most things that feel urgent are not. They are framed that way to capture attention. Your body cannot distinguish between real threat and perceived urgency from a screen, so it reacts the same. Calm requires teaching your system what actually requires response. This is learned through practice. You pause before replying. You delay immediate reactions. You ask, does this truly need my energy right now? Often the answer is no. That pause is powerful. It interrupts automatic escalation. Calm is built in these small moments of restraint. Another overlooked element of calm is internal honesty. Many people stay agitated because they ignore their own limits. They say yes when they mean no. They push when they need rest. They override signals repeatedly. Over time, the body responds with tension. Calm returns when limits are respected. Not perfectly, but consistently. You don't need to change your entire life to become calmer. You need to stop violating yourself daily in small ways. Calm is not found in perfect conditions. It's cultivated in imperfect ones. It's choosing not to rush when others do. Choosing not to react when provoked. Choosing not to consume everything offered. This chapter is not asking you to detach from reality. It's asking you to stop letting reality dictate your internal state. When you become calmer, the world doesn't get quieter. You do. And in that quiet, something important emerges. Discernment. You start noticing what matters, what aligns, what deserves action. Calm does not eliminate problems. It clarifies them. And clarity changes how you move. In a loud world, calm is not withdrawal. It is an advantage. It allows you to remain steady while others are pulled in every direction. And once you experience this steadiness, you realize calm was never about controlling the world. It was about refusing to let the world control you. Chapter 10. The shift you'll notice after this hour. The shift you notice after this hour will not announce itself loudly. It won't feel dramatic. It won't feel like a breakthrough story you rush to explain to someone else. In fact, you might almost miss it. That's because real internal shifts rarely arrive with intensity. They arrive with quiet clarity. You won't suddenly become a different person. Your life won't instantly rearrange itself. Your problems won't magically disappear. But something subtler will have changed. Your mind will feel less crowded. Not empty, not silent. Just less compressed. Thoughts will move with more space between them. Emotions will still arise, but they won't hijack you as quickly. Decisions will feel lighter, even when they're not easy. The first thing you may notice is a change in pace. Not outside, but inside. Situations that once triggered urgency may now feel manageable. You'll still care. You'll still engage. But without the constant pressure to react immediately. That pause you've been practicing throughout this hour will linger. You'll catch yourself breathing before responding. Listening longer, choosing your words more deliberately. This is not restraint out of fear, it's restraint out of clarity. Another subtle shift is how you relate to your thoughts. They will still appear. Worries, plans, memories, ideas. But you'll feel a little less entangled in them. You'll recognize when a thought is noise and when it carries signal. You won't believe everything your mind says by default. That distance creates freedom. Not freedom from thinking, but freedom within it. You'll also notice a softening toward yourself. The urge to fix, correct, or optimize every internal state will lose some of its urgency. You'll still grow. You'll still reflect. But with less hostility. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you'll begin asking, What's happening here? That change in question changes everything. Curiosity replaces judgment. Understanding replaces pressure. This makes growth sustainable. Another sign of the shift is how your body feels. Mental tension often lives physically, in the jaw, the shoulders, the chest. As your mind releases unnecessary load, your body follows. Not completely, not instantly, but noticeably. You may feel more grounded, more present, more settled in your own skin. This grounding affects how you show up around others. You won't need to dominate conversations. You won't need to defend yourself constantly. You won't need to prove your worth through urgency. Your presence will carry more weight precisely because it's not rushed. People tend to respond differently to calm energy. They slow down, they listen more carefully, they trust more easily. Not because you're controlling anything, but because calm signals safety. Another shift you may notice is tolerance for uncertainty. You won't suddenly enjoy not knowing, but you'll resist it less. You'll accept that not everything needs to be resolved immediately. Some questions can stay open. Some answers arrive later. This reduces mental strain dramatically. The mind uses enormous energy trying to eliminate uncertainty. When you stop demanding certainty, that energy becomes available for clarity. You'll also become more selective with your attention. You won't feel compelled to consume everything, react to everything, have an opinion on everything. This selectivity isn't withdrawal, it's respect for your limits. And respecting limits is a form of self-trust. Perhaps the most important shift is this. You'll stop feeling like you're constantly behind yourself. That internal chase will slow. You'll meet your life closer to where it actually is, not where you think it should be. This alignment creates a quiet confidence, not loud assurance, not performative certainty, just a steady sense that you can handle what comes next. That confidence doesn't come from knowing the future. It comes from trusting your response to it. This hour was never meant to teach you something new. It was meant to remind you of something familiar that got buried under noise, speed, and pressure. Your capacity to be present, your ability to choose, your right to move at your own pace. You don't need to hold on to everything you heard. You don't need to remember every idea. What matters is the felt sense you have right now, that slight ease, that bit of space, that quieter inner posture. That is the shift, and it doesn't end when this audio ends. You can return to this pace whenever you notice yourself tightening again. Not by effort, by permission. You don't need to escape the world to stay grounded within it. You just need to remember how it feels to stop pushing against yourself. That memory is now available to you. And whenever you need it, you know where to return. Not to a place, not to a technique, but to a state of being that was never lost, only temporarily drowned out. Stay with that. That's enough. As this hour comes to a close, there is nothing you need to achieve from it. No lesson to master. No rule to remember. No version of yourself you are required to become overnight. What matters is much simpler than that. Notice how you feel now compared to when you began. Not in a dramatic way, not searching for a breakthrough, just noticing. Perhaps your mind feels a little quieter. Perhaps your body feels slightly less tense. Perhaps nothing feels different at all, except a subtle sense of steadiness. All of these are valid. Real change rarely announces itself loudly. It settles in quietly, then reveals itself later in how you respond to life. This audiobook was never about adding something to you. It was about removing what didn't belong. The unnecessary pressure, the borrowed urgency, the constant self-monitoring that kept you braced instead of present. You were never lacking insight. You were overloaded. And when load is reduced, clarity returns on its own. You don't need to replay everything you heard. You don't need to analyze it. If something resonated, let it stay. If something didn't, let it go. Integration happens naturally when force is removed. As you return to your day, you'll re-enter the same world you left. The noise will still exist, the demands will still be there. But you may notice that you meet them differently, with a fraction more space, with a touch less urgency, with a calmer inner posture. That difference matters more than you think. It's in that space that choice lives. Choice to pause before reacting. Choice to listen before speaking. Choice to trust yourself instead of rushing for certainty. You don't need to live in constant calm to benefit from it. You only need to remember what calm feels like. Because once you remember it, you can return to it again and again. Not through discipline, not through control, through awareness. There will be days when everything feels heavy again, days when your mind speeds up, days when pressure creeps back in quietly. That doesn't mean you failed, it means you're human. When that happens, don't push harder, don't criticize yourself, just notice. Notice the tightening, notice the rush, notice the noise. Awareness is not passive, it's corrective. The moment you notice, you've already created space. And space changes everything. You don't need to fix your thoughts. You don't need to fight your emotions. You don't need to outrun the world. You need permission to slow your inner pace even when the outer pace remains fast. That permission is always available. This audiobook doesn't end your journey. It simply returns something to you. Your ability to be present without pressure. Your ability to choose without force. Your ability to trust yourself without certainty. You were never meant to live in constant tension. You were meant to move, rest, reflect, and respond. Naturally, rhythmically, at your own pace. As you go forward, carry only this. You don't need to do more to be okay. You don't need to become someone else to feel aligned. You need less noise, less pressure, less self-resistance, and more permission to be where you are while you move toward where you're going. That balance is not fragile, it's resilient, and it's something you can return to whenever you notice yourself drifting away from it. For now, let this be enough. Not a finish, not a conclusion in the usual sense, just a quiet landing. You stayed, you listened, you allowed space, and that in itself is already a shift.